On today's show, it's a Friday mailbag edition of Locked On Cavs. I'm going to answer questions such as, are the Cavs one move away from making it out of the Eastern Conference when the playoffs arrive? Plus, the NBA treated rivalry week seriously. Who would the Cavs have been playing? We'll talk about those things plus a few more questions on this Friday edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi again, everybody. My name is Danny Cunningham, and I cover the Cleveland Cavaliers over at my Substack, The Inside Shot, and you're listening to another edition of Locked On Cavs, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in all of America. You can find this show and any other Locked On podcast anywhere you get them. That means Apple, that means Spotify, that means YouTube as well. So make sure you hit the thumbs up button and the notification bell as we get started on YouTube. And if you're listening anywhere, hit the subscribe button. It really is the best way to help grow the show. And today's episode of Locked On Cavs brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA. That is LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off your first purchase. On today's show, fielding some mailbag questions, going to talk about potential trades for the Cavs, the likelihood of said trades happening for the Cavs, some job security stuff with Kenny Atkinson. That always seems to be a question. And then finally, we will get to rivalry week in the NBA, because I know so many of you are still seething at the thought of the Charlotte Hornets because of the rivalry, the very serious rivalry between them and the Cleveland Cavaliers. But I want to start with the trade stuff, because that is the thing this time of year that gets the most questions. That is the thing people are most curious about. And with the Cavs being a team that has underachieved so far this year, I think these questions are, a little bit more frequent than anybody thought they would be at the start of the season. And I'm recording this on Thursday night, less than 2 weeks away from the trade deadline. The trade deadline is Thursday, February 5th at 3:00 Eastern time. So the countdown, maybe not quite on yet, but we're getting to it. We're getting close to when we will start to see some moving and shaking starting to take place. And the first question that I wanted to begin with comes from Keith Lane on Twitter. Asks, are there any trades on the margins that make sense to you? And this is ultimately, if the Cavs make a move, this is where I think it will be. Now, if things over the next 2 weeks, and the Cavs have still, I think, 7 games between now and the trade deadline, if I'm not mistaken, if things go really poorly over those 7 games, could that change things? Maybe. I doubt it. I expect this team, if they do anything, I would expect the Cavs to be part of a minor move or two. I would be very surprised at this moment in time, as of 9:45 on Thursday, January 22nd, I would be very surprised if they're major players in the trade market. And I do think that sort of goes along with a lot of the stuff that you may have seen or read recently. There's been, so many trade rumors in the NBA, and you can read everything that ESPN puts out. You can read what The Athletic writes. You can read what Mark Stein over at the Stein Line and Jake Fisher, what those two put out there. And if you read all of it, you really don't see the Cavs pop up too frequently as a team that's involved in stuff or expected to be involved in stuff. And that's not by accident. That's because the Cavs are, I would be surprised again if they're major players as this deadline approaches. But that doesn't mean they can't be players in like the minor trade market. That is something that I do think could potentially make sense. And right now, the Cavs are a team that is a second apron team. And they're not just like barely in the second apron, because if they were barely in the second apron, I actually think a cost-cutting move would be more likely. But they are $22 million over that second apron line. So they would have to shed a ton of salary in order to find themselves on the other side of that second apron, which makes me think a cost-cutting move, while it could be a good thing, and we will talk in just a second about Lonzo Ball potentially being traded, but there's not a move out there. Like, there's not a simple move out there that the Cavs can make that gets them out of the second apron. That's just not going to be the thing that I think they do this year. Now, if things go poorly in the playoffs, that's what I would expect this summer to look like, but that's a long time from now. And there's a lot of basketball to be played between now and then. So as far as trades that could potentially make sense, in my opinion, for the Cavs that are on the margin, I think the conversation really starts with Lonzo Ball. And Lonzo is he's it's the last fully guaranteed year of his contract. He has a $10 million team option, which is important to denote for next season. And Lonzo has really struggled this year. I think that is putting it lightly. And it has been, I think, a disappointment for everybody involved. I certainly thought Lonzo Ball would fit much better with the Cavs. I thought he would play much better than he has. Like, nothing as far as the Lonzo Ball experiment has gone anywhere close to according to plan. He's not shot the basketball well. He has done some other things well. Like, I do think that matters, but like right now, the player Lonzo Ball is not playable in the postseason. And the Cavs need to have as many playable guys in the postseason for when that time arrives, because we saw how important that is last year. So Lonzo right now making $10 million. And because the Cavs are in the second apron, if they trade Lonzo Ball, they have to trade Lonzo for a player that is making $10 million or less. So let's think back to, and this is not a move that I would anticipate to be on the table, but let's say, and I don't know why they would do this, but let's say the Chicago Bulls called the Cavs back and said, hey, remember that trade we made this summer where we sent you Lonzo Ball, you sent us Isaac Okoro? We want a do-over. We want Lonzo back, and we want to give you Isaac Okoro back. The Cavs can't do that because Isaac Okoro's contract is $11 million a year and Lonzo's is only 10. The Cavs cannot add salary in a trade because they're a second apron team. So you have to look at basically at a list of players that are making $10 million or less. And typically with that list, because either those guys are one, not good, or two, on expiring contracts in order to be available. Like, those are sort of, I think, the criteria of players that I was looking for that could potentially help the Cavs. But it's a small pool of players to search for, because a lot of players in the NBA that are making $10 million or less are on rookie scale contracts. And those guys are not necessarily ones, for the most part, that are either one, in a position to help the Cavs out when the playoffs arrive, or two, their teams don't want to give up on them. So it's a tough pool of candidates to look at. But I went out there and I found 5 names, and I haven't necessarily heard these names. These are names that I do think could potentially be available. I've not heard the Cavs as necessarily being connected to any of these names or anyone in particular at this point in time. Doesn't mean that won't change as we get closer to the deadline. But as of right now, this stuff is all pure speculation on my end. And a couple of these guys are former members of the Cavs. And 2 players that have not played yet this year are on this list, because Georges Niang, now a member of the Utah Jazz, has not played this season because of a broken foot. I would anticipate that Niang is not going to play prior to the trade deadline, but I wouldn't be surprised if he starts playing again near the start of March, like end of February, early March is when I think George is targeting a return to the floor. He makes $8.5 million a year. The Cavs could trade Lonzo Ball, and they would have to attach a second round pick. And I believe the Cavs have 4 tradable second round picks at their disposal right now. They would have to attach a second round pick or 2. And you might scoff at that and say, well, it's just a second round pick. Who cares? That's fair. But remember, Tyrese Proctor was a second round pick, and that looks like a big win. And the Cavs have done a good job in that area for the most part. They've not all been hits, certainly, but they have done a good job finding players on the margins that can be helpful. Tyrese Proctor is the latest example of that. So you could be missing out on that type of player, but that's a risk that you have to be willing to take. And the other guy that hasn't played at all this year is Ty Jerome. He's not played a single game for the Memphis Grizzlies. And I think the situation in Memphis right now is different than what it was this summer. And I think that whether or not, one, Ty plays this year, because he has been out this entire season with a calf injury, we don't know. 2, we have seen Ty Jerome at his worst in the playoffs. Isn't necessarily somebody that is capable of always staying on the floor. He is a guy that I do think can be played off the floor. And to be fair, Georges Niang is too. None of these guys are perfect basketball players. If they were, they wouldn't be making less than $10 million per year, and they wouldn't be available. But I do wonder if Memphis does look to move Ja Morant between now and the trade deadline, if they just want to see what they can get for basically everybody. And if they want to start a rebuild, maybe trading away Ty Jerome for a couple of second round picks and a contract in Lonzo Ball that expires and gets you cap space, basically get you out of the Ty Jerome contract this summer. Is that something the Grizzlies might be interested in doing? I'm not entirely sure. I don't know that answer, but it's one that popped into my mind as a potential possibility. It's just hey, I could see this being the case. Another one is Haywood Highsmith from the Brooklyn Nets. He's making around $5 million a year, and he's been injured all year. I don't think he's actually ever played a game for Brooklyn. Previously was in Miami. He's a guy that I do think could be capable of playing in the playoffs. I would imagine that he will return to the floor at some point in the second half of the season. But he's somebody that is a cost-cutting move, and maybe he could play. But I'm not so sure that he's somebody that would be all that helpful. But as I said, you're not exactly pulling from the greatest pool of candidates here. Ayo Dosunmu from the Chicago Bulls is another guy that I looked at. He's probably the best basketball player on this list right now. He would also cost the most. Like, you would have to obviously send Lonzo Ball to Chicago. It would probably take 2 or 3 second-round picks to make that happen. That's my guess. I don't know if the Bulls are interested in that. I think Chicago should tear it down. I think Chicago will tear it down. We'll have to wait and see, but that is a name of a guy that I think could be available, that could be of interest to the Cavs. And then the final one is Saddiq Bey. And Bey is a guy that I really liked in the draft way back when. Started his career in Detroit. He's bounced around a little bit, was with Washington. Now he's with the Pelicans. And Bey is on a very team-friendly contract. He missed all of last season with a torn ACL, and he's not had a very good season so far this year. But I do look at him and think, you know what, could he be somebody that can provide a little bit of spark off the bench for a contender? Could he be that type of guy? And then the one other person I had is Keon Ellis. And Ellis it's a weird situation for him in Sacramento. Like, he's not playing a ton. He's playing around 15 minutes a game. He's played 39 games for the Kings so far this year. He's a good shooter having a down year. If he's available and the Kings are willing to take Lonzo Ball's contract, he would be the guy that I circle and say that could be a guy that helps out the Cavs. And depending on what he costs in the future, he could be somebody that helps out for more than just this year, because he is on an expiring contract, I do believe. But that's something that I think could make sense for the Cavs. Now, those names are all speculation. I don't know that the Cavs are interested in any of those guys right now. I've not really started to poke around about that stuff just because there's still time between now and the deadline. And believe it or not, a lot of this stuff does move fast when you get close to the trade deadline. So I don't know that they're going to make a move, but that's the type of move that I would look at and say, yeah, that might be the one that the Cavs could be interested in making. Now, in conjunction with that question, there was one that says, you know, with the East being what the East is right now, are the Cavs one move away from getting out in the playoffs and making it to the finals? I don't even think that's true. I'll tell you why next, right here on Locked On Cavs. But first, today's show is brought to you by Gametime. During basketball season, there's nothing like being in the building. The energy, the crowd, the first big run that gets everyone on their feet. Fans want to be there for those moments. They don't want to be stuck refreshing screens or guessing what tickets are really going to cost. And that's where Gametime comes in. The Gametime app gives fans the advantage back, making it incredibly easy to score amazing tickets fast, simple, and without the guesswork. Browsing the Gametime app is straightforward and simple. You can find tickets, and it takes just a few taps in order to do so. Plus, the view from your seat before buying makes choosing tickets easy and confident. Yeah, you can pull up the Gametime app, go inside Rocket Arena, pick the seat you want, and you're going to see the Cavs floor. You're going to see exactly what your view is going to be. It's one of the most helpful features that there is. Plus, prices include the fees up front, so the total is clear from the start. You're not going to be bombarded with those last-minute fees when you go to check out. What you think you're going to pay the whole time is what you're actually going to pay. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, that is LOCKEDON NBA, for $20 off your first purchase. Thank you again for making today's edition of Locked On Cavs your first listen. And thank you to those of you that helped to make Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. And if you haven't already, go check out the Everydayer Club, because it gives you access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Cavs that's compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app out there. Plus, an invite to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server, which does include a group chat for listeners of this show. A link is in the show description, either on YouTube or wherever else you might be listening to the show if you would like to learn more. And Ryan on Twitter asks, with the Eastern Conference being as bad as it is this year, are the Cavs one move away from making the finals? I don't think they are. I think that the Cavs, as constructed, if they get fully healthy and if they play to their potential, and I realize those are far from certainties with what we have seen from this basketball team so far this year. I totally understand that. But I think the full potential of this Cavs team right now, as currently constructed, is reaching the NBA Finals. I do not think this is a team that needs to make a move to make it to the finals. Now, would that potentially increase their chances? Maybe, maybe not. I think it's difficult for teams that make changes in the middle of the season to go on a run and reach the finals. I think outside of like having LeBron James on your roster, that's a thing that doesn't necessarily always happen all that frequently. So I don't look at this as say, hey, if the Cavs trade for any one of those players that I mentioned in the first segment, that's going to like open up the door. The door's open. The Eastern Conference right now, as Ryan mentioned in the question, is not that good. And think back to last year where the Cavs had this incredible record. They were like 35-6 at this point in the season. And what did you hear? Oh, well, the Celtics aren't scared of the Cavs, or the Knicks aren't scared of the Cavs in the playoffs. And, no one's scared to play the Cavs in the postseason. And probably got really annoying as a Cavs fan, right? Well, let me ask you this. How do you feel about the Detroit Pistons right now? Are the Pistons a good team? Absolutely they are. They're the best team in the Eastern Conference at this moment. And for the most part, they've been the best team in the Eastern Conference all season long. Are you scared of watching the Cavs play the Pistons in the postseason? Because I don't look at Detroit as some unbeatable behemoth at the top of the conference. The Boston Celtics have had a really good year. Are you scared of the Cavs playing this version of the Boston Celtics in the postseason? They're a really good team. They've been awesome so far this year. Are they some unbeatable team in the playoffs? I don't think so. The New York Knicks are 3-9 in their last 12 games. They're a game and a half ahead of the Cavs, despite how bad Cavs basketball has felt for most of this year. They're a game and a half back of the 3 seed. Toronto, Philly, Orlando, do any of those teams scare you? I don't think they do. I think the answer to that is no. Now, that doesn't mean the Cavs are going to get through those teams, but I look up and down this conference, and as constructed, I asked myself about all those teams. Could I see the Cavs beating the Pistons in the playoffs? I could. Could I see the Cavs losing to the Pistons in the playoffs? Absolutely. The same thing is true of Detroit, of Boston, Orlando, New York, Philadelphia, maybe not as much Philadelphia because the Cavs have beaten them 3 times. But there's not a team I look at in the Eastern Conference and say, Cavs can't beat them. But there's also not a team in the Eastern Conference that I say, the Cavs can't lose to them. It is, to me, far more wide open than I thought it would be at the start of the year. I did not think the Eastern Conference was wide open at the beginning of the season because I thought the Cavs would be much better than they have been. But to the Cavs' benefit, the East still is wide open, and the Cavs are part of the crew in the middle of the Eastern Conference that's capable of winning this conference. But moving on to the next question, Iron Will asks, is Atkinson's job safe? Should it be? Everything that I have heard, and I have asked about this at various points, and I do think it's worth noting here as we talk about this. The Cavs have won 8 of their last 12. They are trending in the right direction. They've been a pretty good basketball team over the past month. That is absolutely worth noting and worth talking about. And as I've asked around about this at various points, I've been vehemently pushed back upon. Every time I've asked somebody, hey, is Kenny on the hot seat? The answer has been no. I have had people come up to me and say, hey, Kenny is not on the hot seat. This should not be a talking point. I do not believe Kenny's job is in jeopardy, and I don't believe that it should be in jeopardy. I think that we are very quick to forget just how good the Cavs were last year. What's been the biggest difference between who the Cavs were last year and who the Cavs are right now? I think health is the number one difference between that. Now, that doesn't mean they don't miss Ty Jerome. That doesn't mean they don't miss Isaac Okoro. That doesn't mean last year's roster during the regular season wasn't better than this year's roster, because it was. And that team was so much better. But that team also had a healthy Darius Garland for the entire season. That team had a healthy Jared Allen for the entire season. That team had a better version and probably a healthier version of Evan Mobley for the entire season. Those things all matter. who the Cavs were last season, and they won 64 games under Atkinson. Like, that doesn't go away. And then they came up short in the playoffs, and ask yourself, why did that happen? Were they not good enough, or did they kind of all get hurt at the same time? Because it wasn't just Darius Garland's foot. DeAndre Hunter dislocated his thumb. Evan Mobley had a high ankle sprain. Like, all of those things happened at once in the series against the Pacers. I'm not going to say that the Cavs didn't need to play better in that series, because they absolutely 100% did, but they were a team that did everything right all year, and then they got hit with injuries at the wrong time. So should Kenny Atkinson be on the hot seat because that happened and then the team is only 5 games above 500 right now? I don't think so. I don't think that Atkinson is like wearing thin or anything like that. Like, has he had a great year as a coach? No, but he hasn't done anything that warrants being fired. Now, if the Cavs don't have success, like say they end up with a worse postseason this year than they did last year, does that conversation change? Maybe, but the Cavs, ever since Kobe Altman took over, the Cavs have not been a reactionary or an overreactionary organization. They have stuck to their plan. They have done things. They have, maybe at times you could be critical and say they've been a little slow to react at times. I think that could be a fair criticism, but they're not going to overreact to 45 games or 46, however many basketball games they played, of underwhelming basketball when all of their goals are still in front of them. This season as a whole was not about, well, what can the Cavs do in the regular season? This season, this journey was about the postseason. And I was watching the postgame show on FanDuel Sports Network after the Cavs beat the Hornets on Wednesday night. And Larry Nance Jr. sat down with Serena Winters and Brad Daugherty after the game, and they pulled up the standings. And the Cavs are in 5th place in the Eastern Conference as of the end of that game. And I believe nothing there has changed, although Philly, as I record this right now, is in overtime with the Houston Rockets. So if they win that game, they might jump the Cavs. But like, that's just the point being, the Cavs are not where they want to be in the standings right now. That's okay. Larry Nance Jr. made the point that they didn't want to play their best basketball in June. They want to play it in April, even March, April, May, and June, not January, I should say. Sorry. I think I said June the first time. They don't want to play their best basketball in January. All of those months, the way the calendar works, still ahead of them. Those goals are all undecided so far. Does it look like the Cavs are on track to accomplish them? Not necessarily, but you can't say they failed them before they actually have. So because of that, like, I think it is silly to sit here and say Kenny Atkinson should be fired. He's not getting the most out of this team. Maybe he doesn't get the most out of this team, but he was never supposed to get the most out of this team in January, in December. And I just think that's an important thing to think about while we look ahead to what the future could be. I just think that's an important thing to keep in mind. Now, it's rivalry week. I know you're probably still pretty pumped up. The Cavs beat their arch rival Charlotte Hornets on Wednesday. I'm joking, obviously, but I got a question about who's the actual rival of the Cleveland Cavaliers. We'll decide that next right here on Locked on Cavs. But first, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better because every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame. It's a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 Eastern have become appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. Opening the FanDuel app during Happy Hour always brings something new. Boosts, bonuses, and surprises. It's easy to check the weekly specials before tip-off and make a move before the window closes. Like I said, 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. What happens at 7:30 p.m.? 7:40 really p.m. Eastern Time this Friday. Oh, the ball go in the air at Rocket Arena as the Cavs take on the Sacramento Kings. So you've got from 6 to 7:30 to enjoy NBA Happy Hour with FanDuel. It's going to add just a little bit of extra energy to your Friday night basketball viewing experience without having to overthink it. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour, only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Thank you again for making today's edition of Locked On Cavs your first watch on YouTube. And if you are watching right now, please do us a favor. Hit the thumbs up button for us, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. And the final question of this Friday mailbag is from my wife. My wife, Brittany, tweeted at me. She could have just, I don't know, asked me this, but instead she saw me on Twitter at Real D Cunningham, put out the call for questions. And I looked through the replies, and there is my wife asking me a question on Twitter that she could have just answered in person. But now, and I hope she doesn't hear this through the walls, she's going to have to download the podcast or watch on YouTube to get the answer to her question, because I'm going to refuse to tell her this in person. I'm going to share this with everybody, and she will get it at the same time that you guys do. So she asks, in the spirit of NBA rivalry week, who would you consider the Cavs' rival, other than, of course, the Charlotte Hornets, who are the obvious answer? And this stemmed from Wednesday night, right? The Cavs are on national television against the Hornets as a part of rivalry week. And even Richard Jefferson and Tim Legler, who had the color commentary for the game between the Hornets and the Cavs on Wednesday night on ESPN, were sort of making fun of the fact that this is rivalry week. And the Cavs play the Hornets there because LaMelo Ball plays for the Hornets. It was really funny to me that he came off of the bench in that game. And Lonzo Ball is on the Cavs. That's why this game was scheduled. There's no rivalry, obviously, between Cleveland and Charlotte, no matter how much we want to joke about it. But the question about who is the actual rival for the Cavs is a legitimate one. And I think it's a fun exercise to go through, because I think that there are a handful of answers. And I think you can look at, it's one, other good teams in the conference, right? Like the Cavs lately have been rivals with the Boston Celtics. They've been rivals with the New York Knicks. They've been rivals with the Indiana Pacers. I am a firm believer that rivalries in the NBA are built based off of playoff series. And what has happened in the past several years? Well, the Cavs have played the New York Knicks in the playoffs. The Cavs have played the Orlando Magic in the playoffs, although they've not played the Magic yet this season. They have played the Boston Celtics in the playoffs. They have played the Indiana Pacers in the playoffs. They've played the Miami Heat in the playoffs too. Maybe that would have made more sense for rivalry week. But I look at those teams as rivals of the Cavs because they are teams right now that are good at the same time. So I think that's part of it. And I also think geography should matter here. And I think that other relationships should matter here. Like right now, I do view the Detroit Pistons as a rival of the Cavs. The Pistons are obviously number one in the Eastern Conference. They're in very close proximity. The Cavs and Pistons do have postseason history. Now, it's been since, I believe, 2016 that they've matched up in the postseason. But in the 2000s, in the first LeBron era, there were obviously multiple really, really classic battles between the Cavs and the Pistons in the postseason. There was a conference final series and there was a semi-conference finals, or a conference semifinals, I guess would be the right way to say that word, between Cleveland and Detroit. So I do think there is a bit of a rivalry there. The other one I look at is the Toronto Raptors. And this maybe is less of a Cavs versus Raptors rivalry as it is a LeBron versus the Raptors rivalry. But for the Cavs to, in 2016, beat the Raptors, in 2017, beat the Raptors. So it was conference finals and then conference semis the second year. And then the third year, LeBron's final year in Cleveland, when the Raptors won 59 games and the Cavs swept them in the playoffs. Like that, to me, you could make a case. And I realize that nobody on either team still plays for that team, right? Like the Raptors are entirely brand new. The Cavs are entirely brand new from those points. So I get that part of it. But I do think that the Cavs fans, to some extent, will always view the Raptors as a rival because of those postseason battles. They'll always view the Celtics as a rival. They've played, obviously, in the postseason a handful of times, or a couple of times in the past decade, and several times in the first LeBron era, too. I think that the Knicks, because the Donovan Mitchell angle, where he kind of thought he was going to be a member of the Knicks, and the fact that they've matched up in the playoffs and they played on Christmas Day, like those big moments, I do think help to build rivals. I do think, like, it's silly the NBA has a rivalry week, and then you look at some of these games that they've got going on right now. And like, are the Chicago Bulls and Minnesota Timberwolves rivals? Why are they playing this week? Or, the Miami Heat and Portland Trailblazers, the Nuggets and the Wizards, like none of these are rivals. I understand it's a thing to market, but if you're going to do it, why wouldn't you do it right? That's kind of the thing I keep coming back to with rivalry week. It's silly. The Cavs and the Hornets aren't rivals. Much would have preferred them play, I don't know, the Knicks or the Pistons or the Boston Celtics during this week. But instead, they get the Charlotte Hornets and then the Sacramento Kings, which I guess that was the team LeBron played first, but nobody in the world thinks Cavs and Kings is a rivalry of any sort. So that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Cavs. I appreciate you hanging out with me here on this Friday. We'll have on YouTube a preview coming up of the Cavs and Kings that's going to come out late Friday morning, get you ready for Friday night's game between Cleveland and Sacramento. If you are a podcast listener, you will not only get that preview, but you will also get a preview of the Cavs and the Magic in the same episode that will come out at noon on Friday Eastern time. Then on YouTube, the Orlando Magic preview will come out Saturday, probably around 11:30 in the morning, to get you ready for the first of two games between the Cavs and Orlando. But as we get out of here, please do me a favor. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button and the notification bell. And if you're listening anywhere else, make sure you are subscribed on that platform. And I will be back tomorrow talking about the Cavs taking on the Sacramento Kings.